On October 22nd, 2025, at 2:17 p.m., over the scarred plains of eastern Ukraine, 12 small drones rise into a sky filled with static and risk. Their rotors hum like a swarm of wasps, cutting through air heavy with anticipation. Each drone is no bigger than a backpack, but together they carry the weight of an entire front line. Somewhere ahead, a Russian military train worth more than $100 million moves along a steel artery that feeds 3 mechanized divisions. The mission is simple on paper and impossible in practice to stop it. In bunkers buried beneath the soil, Ukrainian operators whisper coordinates, knowing every second could be their last. On the other side, Russian crews man a Pantsir S-1 air defense system, a BTR-82A patrol vehicle, and a $10 million Zhitel jamming truck ready to blanket the air in electronic noise. It's intelligence versus interference, glass fiber against raw power, courage against calculation. For 72 hours they have watched, waited, and measured. They have exactly 120 seconds of vulnerability to strike, 2 minutes that could tilt the balance of a battlefield. The story you are about to hear isn't about size or strength. It's about precision, timing, and the human mind under pressure. If this kind of strategy fascinates you, make sure to subscribe, because this is where the unseen stories of modern warfare come alive. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? At 1:47 p.m., in occupied terrain, Ukraine moves like a quiet idea. 12 drones, nothing bigger than a mid-sized toy in spirit, push toward a military supply train at 97 kilometers per hour. They are shadowed by a HIMARS battery and the distant hum of a Bayraktar TB2 on patrol. Russia responds with a Pantsir S-1, an armored BTR-82A crew, and an R-330ZH Zhitel jamming truck. Numbers stacked like dominoes. 12 attackers, 3 layers of defense, 3 dispersed command bunkers spaced 500 meters apart, and 1 electronic vehicle pumping 10 kilowatts of noise into the sky. The scene is clinical and cinematic. The drones look like dragonflies. The Pantsir looks like a prize fighter with heavy gloves. The Zhitel sounds like an expensive phonograph playing static on repeat. Ukraine wants a blunt result. Break the lifeline. Cripple a rail corridor long enough to strand formations. The stakes are shocking. $4,800 of modified drones against air defenses worth millions, and a supply line valued at well over $100 million. It reads like arithmetic, but feels like poetry. Small things bending the map. Which shocks you most? The cost, the courage, or the calculation? What would you bet on money or on cunning? What do you think happens next? At 2:03 p.m., in the hush before action, the plan crystallized. Ukrainian teams split into 3 command posts spaced 500 meters apart, so one lucky shell could not kill the whole brain of the operation. They stacked assets like a cautious gambler stacks chips. A HIMARS battery sat at range. A Bayraktar TB2 kept overwatch. Opposing them, a Pantsir S-1 stood sentinel, a BTR-82A crew manned a crossroads, and an R-330ZH Zhitel truck waited to blanket the sky in noise. They ran the math out loud. 72 hours of surveillance, 120 seconds of predictable exposure every time a military train rolled through. A window small enough to whisper through and big enough to change a campaign. They expected losses up to 60% and still pressed on because 4 precise hits could undo weeks of logistics. The language was practical, not poetic, the mood measured, not manic. Danger was treated like weather to forecast, and timing was treated like cash to spend. The planners accepted risk as ledger entries and courage as necessary expense. Which part shocks you most, the cold calculation, the readiness to accept loss, or the faith in a handful of drones? Would you take that bet to stop an army for days? What would your number be if lives and strategy were on the line? At 2:17 p.m., the silence cracked like glass. 12 Ukrainian drones lifted from the hidden field, their rotors spinning in harmony, a sound halfway between bees and anger. They climbed to 100 meters, locked formation, and pushed east at 97 kilometers per hour. Each carried its mission in a camera no bigger than a coin. The Bayraktar TB2 above them watched like an eagle guiding its hatchlings through storm. 8 kilometers away, a Russian Pantsir S-1 radar blinked awake. Its antenna spun, tasting the sky. The operator saw 12 faint dots at range and called it in. Seconds later, a BTR-82A gunner racked a belt of 30mm rounds and opened fire. Tracer lines arced upward, 1,000 glowing pencils scribbling chaos across the clouds. The swarm split instantly. 4 climbed, 4 dropped, 4 sliced through the middle. The air looked like a shattered mirror, glinting with motion and sunlight. Then came the hum. The R-330ZH Zhitel electronic warfare truck switched on its emitters, flooding the air with 10 kilowatts of electromagnetic static. To human ears, it was silent. To every radio signal within 30 kilometers, it was a scream. 3 drones instantly lost control. Their screens turned to snow, but the other 9 were not listening to the air. They whispered through light. Fiber-optic cables thinner than fishing line, connecting them to their operators through kilometers of glass. The physics were simple but brutal. Radio travels through air and can be jammed. Light travels through glass and cannot. Trying to jam a fiber-optic signal is like trying to stop a flashlight by yelling at it. The Zhitel's $10 million systems were now expensive noise generators, blind and useless against glass threads that weighed less than a feather. Inside one Ukrainian bunker, the operator's hands danced across a console. Through the lead drone's lens, he could see tracer fire curve beneath the swarm. The drones jinked every 2 seconds, random movements generated by code that mimicked human panic. Up, left, drop, rise. The gunner on the BTR tried to lead them properly, but it was like throwing rocks at hummingbirds. For every burst he fired, the targets were already somewhere else. At 2:24 p.m., a 152mm artillery shell landed 600 meters from the nearest command post. The ground shook, dust fell from the ceiling, but communications stayed alive. The operators shifted to backup bunkers through narrow tunnels, keeping control while shells walked closer. Every move had been calculated. At 500 meters apart, even a direct hit could never silence them all. Meanwhile, the Pantsir radar tracked and lost again. The system was built to hit cruise missiles, not targets the size of dinner plates moving like swallows. Each drone's signature was a whisper under the noise floor. The gunner switched to optical mode, peering through his seeing flashes of light reflecting off the thin cables trailing behind the drones. For a moment, it looked like spider silk hanging in the wind. By 2:31 p.m., 9 drones were still inbound, 6 kilometers from the rail corridor. The Russian crew inside the Zhitel tried to increase power output to 12 kilowatts, enough to cook a radio receiver, but nothing changed. The drones flew on, unaffected, their signals impossibly clean. Confusion filled the cabin. Expensive screens, perfect noise, zero control. The war had become a physics exam. Equations decided survival. Glass defeated metal. Light defeated noise. Intelligence defeated power. And somewhere under the noise, 12 operators breathed in sync with machines worth less than used motorcycles, betting on precision against probability. What shocks you most? The power of physics or the weakness of technology? The cost of courage or the blindness of arrogance? What would you have believed if you were sitting behind that radar, watching impossible dots keep coming? 2:39 p.m. The battle had turned into pure math. 9 Ukrainian drones pushed through the haze, 5 kilometers from the rail line that fed an entire Russian division. Each one carried a warhead no heavier than a brick, yet each could deliver more impact than a precision shell if it struck the right point. Overhead, the Bayraktar TB2 kept orbit, relaying visuals back to the bunkers where operators watched their heartbeat on screens the size of tablets. On the Russian side, the Pantsir S-1 had gone from confidence to confusion. Its radar kept losing lock every time the drones dropped below tree height. The operator cursed softly, switching to optical mode. Through his sight, he saw them darting between power lines and smoke, moving too erratic for a computer to predict. The guns roared anyway, 30-millimeter shells ripped through air at 900 meters per second, tracing white streaks across the horizon. One drone vanished in a bright bloom, another spiraled down trailing sparks, but 7 kept coming. At 2:44 p.m., the R-300ZH Zhitel boosted power again, now 12 kilowatts, enough to scramble every radio in a city block. The irony was bitter. The flood of interference also blinded their own units. Russian squads near the junction tried to call for coordinates but heard only static. Their radios became bricks. The air defense network, designed to talk like a choir, was now a silent orchestra. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian operators watched power levels drop. Batteries were bleeding fast, down to 20%, but timing was perfect. They needed 40 more seconds to reach optimal strike range. As the Pantsir's barrels glowed red, internal sensors forced a cool-down cycle. 12 seconds of silence. For a fighter jet, that's nothing. For drones moving at 97 kilometers per hour, it's forever. The 7 survivors punched through the gap. 4 climbed to 200 meters. 3 dropped to ground level, flying low over grass and rail ties. The high group drew the Pantsir's eye. The gunner elevated his barrels, chasing the group against the sky. But the low flyers were already ghosts in the weeds. It was the same mistake made 3 weeks earlier on another sector. Engage what you can see, forget what you can't. At 2:47 p.m., a platoon near checkpoint 7 opened up with AK rifles, 40 barrels flashing at once. Each bullet traveled at 700 meters per second, but the drones crossed perpendicular at 27 meters per second, giving the soldiers less than 1 second to aim, react, and fire. Human reflex takes a quarter second to think, half a second to act. By the time they squeezed the trigger, the drones were gone. 2 of the high flyers dropped small thermite canisters over the rail bed behind the train. In seconds, the aluminum and iron oxide mixture burned at 2,500 degrees Celsius, turning steel rails into liquid metal. The track glowed orange, bending like wax under a candle. The convoy now had no way back. Smoke filled the air, thick enough to blind every thermal sensor in the area. Thermal imaging can pierce night in fog, but not smoke. For the first time in hours, Ukraine had true invisibility. 7 drones, 1 goal, less than 1 minute to destiny. The operators whispered coordinates, watching the map shrink to a single red dot. War had turned into arithmetic again. Seconds, meters, voltage, all collapsing towards zero. And in that zero lay history. What amazes you more? The luck or the logic, the failure of machines or the precision of minds? Would you call this courage or just the cold rhythm of strategy? When the smoke clears, what remains isn't just the wreckage of machines, but the quiet proof that intelligence can outthink intimidation. Watching this operation unfold, you can feel how modern warfare has changed shape. It is no longer just about the biggest gun or the loudest roar. It's about who can think faster, who can see clearer, who can stay calm when the map itself seems to burn. Ukraine's strike wasn't only a display of courage, it was a message written in precision and patience. Every meter of movement, every second of timing, every calculation between power and silence showed how strategy has become the new steel. In a world that often measures strength by size, this battle reminded us that the smallest spark, guided by knowledge and belief, can bend the fate of entire armies. There is something deeply human here too. Behind every screen, behind every drone, there were hands trembling slightly, people making choices they could never undo. Not heroes from stories, just men and women who believe that purpose is worth risk. It teaches us that courage is not loud. It's measured in persistence, in planning, in the refusal to surrender when the odds look impossible. And beyond the battlefield, this story reaches us, civilians, creators, thinkers, dreamers, because it's about how ideas can break walls that steel cannot. You don't need to be holding a drone controller to fight your own kind of battle. Sometimes it's a fight to keep learning, to adapt, to stay sharp in a world that keeps jamming your frequency. So as you watch this unfold, to ask yourself, what do you take from it? The math, the message, the proof that small things can still move the earth when guided by will and clarity? If you've stayed with this story to the end, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Which city, which country, which corner of the world? Drop it in the comments. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe. Every story here is built to make you think deeper, feel stronger, and see the unseen connections between courage, technology, and the human mind. Because this isn't just about war, it's about understanding how precision, creativity, and belief can still change history one quiet decision at a time.